Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cybersecurity Recruiter podcast. Joined by my friend Leo today. How you doing, my friend?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good, mate. I'm in a good mood considering it's a Monday morning.
Yeah, I feel that for sure.
So, for everyone listening, Leo Pate III is a senior managing consultant at NetSPI. I'm just going to do you a bit of an intro here for the listeners, Leo. Back in the day, started out as a human resources specialist, did various tasks there and various things with regard to that. And then in 2014, got into information technology as an information technology specialist for Berkeley County School District. You then went on to be into security consulting for Soteria. You were then a tech mentor for Node SC. You were also then a incident responder for and network security analyst for KSH Solutions. You were also a director of assessments for Rhino Security Labs. You spent around 5 years in the Army in the National Guard, and where you have now gone on to, you were then at Envisum, which got acquired by NetSPI, and you started off as an application security consultant, and you've now progressed up to a senior managing consultant. Welcome to the show, mate. How did I do? Did I get your intro about right?
Yeah, it's pretty close. A lot of those. So my background in history, it's multiple lines of effort all moving at the same time. So I guess clean up some of it, so to speak. I enlisted in 2007 as a human resource specialist. I bounced around from various units supporting various types of soldiers across the Army. Eventually, in 2012, I was assigned to an interrogation battalion, and then we deployed to Afghanistan for 12, 13 months. And so acted as a human resource guy, strength management, reporting on numbers coming in and out of the country, awards. People got pay problems, they come and talk to me. People got evaluations, they come and talk to me. They want to get promoted, they come and talk to me. So I handled anything paperwork wise that touched a soldier. After that, after I got back from Afghanistan, I decided to go to school. So I left active duty Army and joined the reserves. And then I bounced around from various units there while I was in college and did ROTC at the Citadel, which is a military college of South Carolina, and eventually landed at the South Carolina National Guard as essentially as a cadet. But I was brought onto the team as a cyber team leader as part of a ragtag group of soldiers that was the mastermind of Nikki Haley when she was the governor. So she wanted to have a military response in case something were to come and attack South Carolina's critical infrastructure. So this team essentially was built to support that. And so a lot of work has been done with industry partners and that sort of thing, which kind of paved the way to the Cyber Warfare Battalion, which South Carolina was granted from the National Guard Bureau. And so after I graduated from college, I went off, did some more Army training to fully become an officer, and then came and helped staff and fill the cyber warfare unit as a cyber warfare officer for the National Guard, and then eventually mobilized to Fort Meade in support of cyberspace operations stuff that we were doing for the government there. I spent about 12 months there and then came back and then kind of find out I have an autoimmune disease. My time as an Army officer was cut short. So then my wife and I decided to move to Seattle to pursue the director of assessments job that you mentioned earlier. And then after that, we eventually landed back at Invisium and back in South Carolina. And then now we're at NetSPI.
Yeah, cool, man. So, Leo, there's loads that I want to dive into on your journey, mate. There's a lot that, as you were talking there, you were mentioning dealing with people. I think you were mentioning dealing with some, promotions that came to you. Something into. I'm imagining there's a lot there that enhanced and brought your communication skills on. So we'll get into that. I think that could help the listeners. And also, you've transitioned out of the army. You've transitioned from that kind of role into being a pen tester in working in security in the commercial space. You've broke into the commercial space, so there's loads of things that you've done, and then you've progressed on to being a managing consultant within the security space. So there's a lot there that you've done that a lot of people will be listening now that want to do. Maybe they're struggling to do that. Maybe they're struggling to break in. So essentially, mate, there's a few bits to unpack there. Perhaps we'll start with that transition out of the army. How was that coming into the commercial world? Was it different? Was it scary? Any advice for people listening that are about to go on that transitional phase, or maybe are going through it now?
Yeah, for sure. So enlisting in 2007, I was 17 years old. So I grew up in the army. It wasn't until I hit about 21, 22 years old that I left active duty army and went to college. And not only that, but I went to a liberal arts school in Charleston, South Carolina. And coming from a very structured, very regimented world to the exact polar opposite of a liberal arts education, it was very different. And to be honest, I think maybe my southern is showing a little bit, but I didn't even know what liberal arts was until my second year in college. I was just clueless. I was like, man, school is hard. Like, why is it so hard? I have to think about everything. And then one of my friends was like, yeah, it's a liberal arts school. All you do is think in theory. And I was like, I don't know what this means. And then they had to explain it to me. But some of the, I guess, a lot of the lessons learned that people going through that now transitioning, I think it's slightly less difficult because doing we're a lot of people that are making that transition are not jumping from warfare in a very hot spot in the world, and then they're just dumped back into society, right? I think as you're walking around today, you're seeing a lot less soldiers with actual combat patches on, which signifies that they served time in a war zone. I think from there, I think a lot of the lessons learned the government has done from Iraq and Afghanistan veterans has done a lot more to prepare people that are now currently transitioning, right? There's full blown programs that are out there that take people from start to finish. I think in the Army, it's called SFL TAP. It's an acronym. I have no idea what it means. I think SFL is Soldier for Life. Actually, I think it's the Soldier for Life Transition Assistance Program. I think that's what it stands for.
Yeah, cool,
If
cool.
not, it sounds really good.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Yeah.
But moving forward from there, I think one of the biggest things, I made my journey like by myself. So I looked for me, I knew I wanted to go to school because I wanted to become an officer, and to become an officer you needed a college degree. I did the entire application process from Afghanistan, and I from applying to picking and then moving back to the United States and then starting school. And it was super daunting because I did it by myself. And a lot of it was like, I don't know, it was very difficult. And so, what I wish I had a mentor or somebody that could have walked me through this process and walked me through to say, here's how you get your GI Bill stuff set up. Here's the things that your school may require from residency and that sort of thing. Here's how you get your books. And me, in this specific example, going to college, College of Charleston at the time did not have a very strong veteran support program. They had a lot of veterans and they had a veterans office, but mostly those people were the representative to do your GI Bill benefits from the school. And literally it was just tuition. And then toward my end of my time at College of Charleston, that kind of exploded to a full blown support system set up for veterans that help and not only acquire education benefits to pay for their school, but then also provide with other mentors that are senior students that are also veterans that can coach people through and that sort of thing. So I wish that I had a mentor of some sort, both at the school level and as a personal level, to help guide me through that process because it was challenging, but it can most definitely be done. A lot of perseverance, a lot of put your head down and that sort of thing. But I also, in that time, relied on my military skills like very heavily, like the attention to detail, the having purpose and drive and motivation and a focus and bringing that into the classroom. So I was 21, 22 years old going to school, and I was in class with 18-year-olds that just graduated high school like 4 months ago. And 4 months ago for me, I was kicking a rock in an airfield in Afghanistan. It's a lot of perspective that I was able to bring into the classroom. And then it also helped craft a study plan and time management and like all those other things that I've learned through my skills and experience in the military. It's a blend of both worlds. And I think normally when you combine those two things together, you have a strong mentor and then you rely on the soft skills, so to speak, coming in. I think most people will do like super okay.
Yeah, no, cool. Thanks, Leo. You mentioned a couple of really good points there about You mentioned having the discipline, having the structure, and if that is channeled into the right things and the right daily, weekly, and routines, it can be done consistently for a sustained period of time. I think that kind of thing is going to really amount to some serious career progression and moving forward in the right direction in security. Yeah, I think it's really a really good point to make is that there's a lot of good core skills there. You mentioned attention to detail that you've got coming out of the military. So perhaps for folks listening, remember there is a lot that you've got there already. You mentioned that there's more support now, mate, which is great. I think that's really important. And you mentioned you wish you'd had a mentor to go through it all. For people listening that perhaps are also feeling like that as well, like wishing they had a mentor, you've been through it. I know you mentioned there's a lot of organization and stuff like that. If you were mentoring someone now coming through it, what kind of things that would you say for them? Perhaps there's people listening now that want a mentor and they haven't got one just like you. So what would you say to those guys or girls?
Yeah, so I would it's super easy to say go get a mentor, right? It's easy to say that out loud, but it's harder in practice because one, you may not know where to look, and then two, you yourself may not even know what your next step is. For me, I knew I wanted to go to school. I knew that was the next path for me in my own professional career. So therefore, I would have sought out a mentor that is good, that is super knowledgeable in the education world, that also understands the struggles of not only veterans but then combat veterans that are transitioning. Right, there's a lot of layers there. I will say there's a lot of resources out there that people could utilize to help craft what type of mentor, more specifically, it's not necessarily the mentor. It's what are you hoping to get from the mentor. And so, if you're wanting to go to a trade school, for instance, to become an automotive mechanic, then you wouldn't want a mentor that specializes in helping people get PhDs, right? That's not the type of, I'm sure there's overlap and there's things that you could pick up, but that's not the type of person with a background that's going to help you get to where you want to go. So that's the first step. What is it that you're trying to do when you're transitioning, right? Are you just trying to go straight into the workforce? Are you trying to go to a 4-year university? Are you trying to go to a trade school? And I would try to figure that out first. And then from there, say, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. Now let me go find a mentor that can help me fill in the gaps of my knowledge, so to speak. And so there's a lot of resources out there that aren't very well publicized, in my opinion, but that are, I don't believe that they're affiliated with the government in any way or the federal government, but VetSec is one, VETSEC. It's a Slack group that is literally just veterans that are involved in security, all facets of security. They're classified as a nonprofit. That's like an instant you can blast it to the world and get some responses fairly quickly. And then I was involved in a mentoring program before, specifically for veterans, that if you were transitioning, you could sign up with this program. I believe it was called Veterati. I believe VETERATI. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's the name of it. And it was essentially a program that had veterans that could act as mentors, and then also have people looking for mentors can come in and they can pick their mentors based on the experience or whatever. And then through the portal itself, you could schedule phone calls or Zoom calls or whatever. And so that was something that I initially started doing, but then life got crazy.
Mm.
And then I had to back off of that because I had a kid. So I had to back off of that. But that is another resource out there. And between those two resources, you could most definitely pose your questions or find additional support should you need it in whatever area you're looking for.
Mate, they sound wicked. So that second one, what we'll do for everyone listening, we'll check the names and we'll get all the links in the show notes. That second one is like a matchmaker for mentors. Mentors are difficult to get, mate. It sounds like these groups, mate, are absolutely banging. So this veterinary is like a matchmaking place, online virtual place for matching veterans with mentors. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's VETERATI. And I think you, looking at pulling up their website real quick, service members, veterans, and military spouses can set up free 1 hour mentorship phone calls with professionals. And then you get to choose your own mentors and as many as you would like. It says on their website, our average member selects 4 mentors, and some mentees have 25 plus mentors. You can create a free profile to get unlimited access to thousands of volunteer mentors, CEOs, recruiters, entrepreneurs, managers, veterans. It's like a smorgasbord, essentially, of who you want.
Mate, that sounds really good. Because yeah, it is hard, and I mentioned this before on a previous show when we had Joe from TCM on, because we were talking about how hard it is to find a mentor. But like in this day and age, like sometimes we think mentor will like, okay, so I've got to go to a networking event, I've got to walk up to someone, I've got to shake their hands, I've got to buy them a beer or a coffee, and I've got to ask them to be the mentor. It's just not like that anymore. Your mentor could be someone on LinkedIn, it could be someone in the exact way you've just described, Leo, or it could even be someone listening to this podcast now, hearing you talking about how you transitioned into the commercial security world. That is a form of mentoring, even though it's like, I think these days there's lots of different kind of cybersecurity influencers these days that people can listen to on YouTube and Twitch and LinkedIn. So there's so many different ways, mate, isn't there? But yeah, mate, that site sounds really good. I like that.
Yeah, it is. I think it, and it's simple, and in my opinion, it removes the barrier to entry. Even if you're not a security person, but you're thinking of starting a company, or that you're thinking of going into a new industry, right? Something of this platform can connect you with people that are willing to meet with you, that have that level of experience to coach you and guide you through whatever it is that you're trying to get through. Um,
Mm,
and so another kind of recommendation I would make is don't just settle for one, right? It's whatever you're
mm,
trying to do. Maybe it's the army in me coming out, but I try to get three, right? I try to have three options, and then I discuss my things with these three people, and then based on their feedback or what they tell me, I cross reference it with each other to say, I'm hearing from some people that you're telling me to go left, and they say sometimes it's okay to go right. I'm
yeah.
not calling you a liar. I'm just asking. And they say, well, yeah, you could go right sometimes, but it really depends on X, Y, and Z. And then if you do that, then it'll eventually lead you to go left. And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, so you gave me
Yeah.
cliff notes. These people wanted me to go through the pain. Got it. And
Yeah.
you could do that piece too.
One of my mates says, he goes, the world is full of advice. You just got to make sure, be careful what you take, or just make sure you take the right. He says it better than me, and that's what you said there. It's so true, and I think that's a really important point. If you have got access to more than one mentor, I think, because I do it in my own life, whether it's personal or business, I ask for advice, but I'll always step back and go, what do I think as well? I don't just blindly go,
Yeah.
okay, what I mean, you've got to see what works best for you as well, and take all the information on board. But, mate, thank you for that. I think in terms of transitioning out and help for veterans, mate, I think that particular 10-15 minute slot in this episode, mate, is probably up there with some of the most valuable information we've had on the show, mate. So thank you for that. So
Mm-hmm.
as we move forward in your journey, mate, so you've transitioned out of the army, but also not only that, you've progressed within the commercial world as well. So can you tell us a bit about that? Can you tell us a little bit about how it happened? Can you tell us, maybe give us some hints and tips on how to move forward in a security career, or how you've moved forward in yours, mate?
Yeah, for sure. I Throughout my time in the army, I realized that I like breaking a lot of rules. Like there was a certain way of doing things, and I would not be afraid to tell my officers at the time, this is dumb. Why are we doing it this way? This is something that'll take 8 hours. And then if we do it this way, it'll still meet the same objective and only take 4 hours. And so I oftentimes got in a lot of trouble, not only because of my mouth, but because I would just not do it. And so in that, I had a lot of people that were my leaders that I felt that I could do the job better than you. And that has just fueled leadership and management in me, and has made me want to have that impact of people in a positive way and reduce the negative impact that I was currently feeling. And so I knew when I left the army that I wanted to be, for lack of a better word, I wanted to be the boss. I felt that I had a lot of good skills and knowledge and abilities to lead people effectively. I just needed to hone those. And so that's where my career has gone. It has gone the path of leadership and management. And it one of the good lessons learned I had is when I went to work at a consulting firm out in Seattle. For instance, it was my first job outside of military or government, and I didn't know anybody that like got me in the door. Like it was, I applied on a job form, and then after countless rounds of interviews, I eventually got the job. And then I moved my family out to Seattle, and then I was there for 6 months, and then I eventually got fired. Right, and I think that was the first time that I had really gotten kicked in the teeth in life at that time. And over the next 2.5 months, I was unemployed. And then I spent that time really just refocusing on what is it that I wanted to do and where did I want to go and why did I fail in this last venture. And what I found in that is that the very first thing that I failed at was trying to emulate somebody else's ideas and their ways of doing things and neglecting the way that I would have done it. And so, just painting the scene, it was a smaller firm. It was a very flat organization. The CEO was ran over he was overseeing everything. And I was the first kind of buffer level hire on a leadership team to take over some of those responsibilities. And so my intentions were good. I didn't want to mess up. I didn't want to rock the boat. I wanted to listen to how this person would solve these problems and then apply that decision making to the situations that I was facing. But in the process of doing that, obviously it didn't work out because I'm not that person. I don't have that person's skills and expertise and foresight and knowledge and all these other things. I have my own. And in me trying to emulate this person's decisions, I came off as indecisive. I came off as not knowledgeable, and it showed. And I think those were valid things that was brought to my attention when I was shown the door. I think the second thing is to my experience in the military, offensive security in the federal government is very different than offensive security in the commercial space. It's two very different skill sets. There's some overlap, but it's two ways of thinking, it's two ways of planning, and there's just a whole bunch of differences between them. And so I came into a consulting firm that does offensive security with that mindset. And it was a world that I didn't fully understand, not just from a manager and leadership level, but also from a technical level as well. And I realized there were gaps in my knowledge there as well. So with those two things, in those 2.5 months I was unemployed, I spent time honing my security skills, right? I had a strong defensive background. I come from a systems and networks background, but I really wanted to learn more on the offensive side of things. And at the time, application security was starting to pick up. There were apps for everything. Web apps were being developed, mobile apps were being developed. And when I was in school for my computer science degree, I just hated coding. And I think I hated coding because I didn't fully understand it. And I wanted to just keep going back to my systems and network background. And so I spent a lot of time just learning application security and digging into code. And the way that I did that is the Portswigger Web Academy labs were amazing. They're free. You need an email address, an internet connection, and a computer and a web browser. That's literally all you need. And then I married that with very dated resource, but it's still, I feel there's a lot in there that's still pretty applicable, is the Web App Hackers Handbook. And then I married those two resources together to start to develop what does a methodology for web app pen testing look like? What are some tricks? What are the things that I need to look for when I'm looking for this particular vulnerability class, right? Like injection or out of bound testing and those sorts of server side controls, client side controls. So really, really honing in on those. And then during this time, I was also interviewing. So I viewed every interview as an exercise, right? And it was a lessons learned process where I would do the interview. Most of the time there was a technical piece that I had to do with it, and I just used it as another lab to hone my skills. And I think a lot. I interviewed for over, I think, 115 unique positions, and I got like some callbacks. I made it to some final rounds, but it just didn't go that way. And so something else that I would do is if I got the thanks but no thanks email, then I would follow back up and be like, I appreciate your time. Can you tell me where I didn't meet the mark? Right. And do that follow up. And I didn't always get a response, which is fine. But there were a couple people that actually took the time, 10, 15 minutes to say, We felt that you were very personable. You've had good manager leadership skills, but we just felt your technical skills wasn't on point. These are the areas that we deemed you on, essentially, as not knowing that much about. And then I took that and said, okay, then now I need to go target these areas,
Mm.
because if it's the same interview essentially for all these different companies, right? If these people said that I missed this mark here, then it's a high likelihood that I missed the others. And even at the end of it, I got to a point of, okay, there's a lot here that it's one thing to do labs, it's another thing to read a book, but it's another thing to actually have the experience and the on the job training and experience to do it. And so if I wanted to meet my long term goal of becoming a leader and a manager of security practitioners, then I needed to put myself at their level and understand how do they do their job and get that experience. So I had to go back to being the bottom man on the totem pole again in order to get the experience I need so at a later date I could lead these people more effectively. And that's exactly what I did.
Mm.
It, which kind of leads me to the last part is, after 100 and some interviews, like, you just get demoralized. You really do. Like, I still have this spreadsheet. I tracked every job that I applied for, when I applied for it, the position, the company, what the status of is, and as of date. And I keep this just to remind myself of how difficult it is for entry level people without having that experience, how hard it is to get into the field. And I used that in the back of my head when I eventually became a hiring manager at Invisium for all of our consultant positions. I used that in the back of my head to say,
Mm.
let me not just go through this interview process like it's another interview. Let's try to flesh out this person's all their knowledge and skills and abilities and find out, is there a way that we can say yes to utilize all their skills? And it wasn't always the case, right? Sometimes a lot of people just didn't have the skill sets or the knowledge, and that's fine. But then also remembering that if when I didn't always get it, but I would get the email sometimes of people saying, what can I do to improve? Where did I fail? Where did I miss the mark? And I remember being in those shoes. So I take the 15, 20 minutes and I'm like, here's where I felt that you failed, and that's fine. It's okay. I know it sucks because you didn't get the job that you're probably hoping for, but here's what I would do if I were you. Go through this material, go through this stuff, come back when you're done, and let's talk again, right? Just because you apply once and you didn't get the job doesn't mean that the door is closed forever. It's just closed for right now, right? And I don't know, I've done hundreds of interviews. I think I've had a handful of people actually do that. They go through the work and then they come back and they're like, I went through everything. I feel like I'm much better prepared now. Can we try again? And I was like, yeah, we're still hiring. Apply, and we'll go through this whole process again. And in that vein, trying to figure out, how do I break into it? How do I break into this industry? I reverse engineered it. And I said, who are these people that are constantly in podcasts and conference talk video recordings and that are always on webinars? Who are these people? And then I go and research these, I target these people essentially in a very non malicious way and say, how did they get into the security space? What path did they follow to get there? And I eventually landed at a person called Tim Tomes. He's like the Burp Suite guy. He knows the ins and outs of Burp Suite and using it effectively. And so I Googled him, found his website, looked on his website, and saw that he did some work at Invisium. And I was like, what is Invisium? And I Googled it and I pulled up their website, and Invisium was an AppSec consulting firm at the time. And I said, oh, perfect. This is a firm that I've never heard of, never targeted before. It's smaller, which means maybe their standards are a little bit lower, or the barrier to entry is a little bit lower because they are a smaller company. And so I applied. I sent them a cold email and I was like, are you applying? Are you hiring? Essentially, here's my resume. I got an email back the next day. It was like, yes, we are. Are you interested? If so, we can start the process off tomorrow. And so I went through the process and I eventually was hired. And so I came in at the bottom man on the totem pole. I did not think it was going to take 2.5 months with all my experience, like leading cyber operations in the Army and certifications for days and degrees and officership. I was like, I'm going to find a job fairly quickly, especially living in Seattle. And I was humbled, to say the least. I was humbled. And At Invisium, I was there for about a year, and then my boss at the time, my manager, they had one managing consultant. He decided to move on to another org, and the position opened up, and I was like, "Here's another chance to see if the first time was a fluke or not. Did I learn my lesson?" And again, I feel better prepared now because I've lived a life for a year. And so I threw my name in the hat, or threw my name in the ring, and in that vein, I won and I got the job, but I won by default, as I later found out that nobody else wanted it. And so from there, I just kept expanding
Mm.
um, my manager and leadership route. But yeah, that's my path into getting to where I'm at now. And the highlights from that: don't be afraid to take a step back in order to move forward. Some people, their ego gets in the way, and they're like, well, I've led teams of teams, like I'm super smart, I know this stuff. But when you're trying to break into a new, I'm not going to say new industry, but a new market within the industry, then it can be challenging, it's hard.
Mm.
And so sometimes you've got to humble yourself a little bit and put some of that pride away and be the guy in the room to ask dumb questions or newbie questions, so that way you can get to where it is you're eventually trying to go.
Leo, mate, honestly, for everyone listening, if you're listening now, just rewind that bit and just listen to those last 10, 15 minutes. I'll tell you why, Leo, because, mate, you've had in there, right? You've had setbacks, you've lost your job. Instead of blaming others, you've looked within, tried to point the blame on yourself, and then you've not tried to, you've upskilled yourself, you've proactively asked for feedback, you've gone and had over 100 interviews, which I'm going to have to dive into more, mate. You must be like an interview genius, mate. But yeah, those setbacks, like looked inwards, you've reversed engineered role models and success stories within the industry. You've thought about it, you've targeted smaller firms where various advantages there. One of the key advantages there is key decision makers, founders are much more accessible. But mate, there is absolutely so much, mate, that you've done there that we should not take for granted. That I firmly believe, having listened to every word you said there, mate, it's been absolutely intrinsic to your success, mate. So thank you, mate. There's loads we can learn from that. Just a quick question. You said you used to tell your officers in the army they were dumb. How does that go down?
So I don't know. I don't want to bash I have a lot of friends that are still officers. I don't want to bash them. When I left the army, one of my friends who eventually became a battalion commander was like, Leo is always a thorn in my side. He always was. He was like, but what he brought to the table was not necessarily common sense, but also reasoning. And it made me second guess like my own decision making and saying, is this the best way forward, or is this what someone wants me to do? But some of these other officers that I've worked for, they've worked under me, I've worked with. I'm just like, man, I guess I'm just built different because I don't understand how you made it to this level without having with the decisions that you're making.
Mm, mm, mm,
Essentially.
mm, mm,
And it's not necessarily the decisions, but it's the impact of those decisions, right? Because officers are in the army, officers are the planners. They're not the doers, they're not the minions, right? The enlisted soldiers are the minions, the officers are the planners, and they plan entire operations, and then they say, okay, here's our order, now we're going to go execute. Team, now we're going to go execute, and everybody has their piece, and then officers are orchestrating it.
mm,
And it's a skill not everybody can do, right?
mm,
And that's general. There
mm,
are like individual contributor positions that are open to officers only, that they're not leading a team, they're leading an initiative or they're leading an effort by themselves, right? But most of the time when you think of like army officers, you think of leading people and having like very large teams. As second lieutenants in the army, like 9 times out of 10, you're going to serve as a platoon leader, and your platoon could have up to about 30 people in it that you're responsible for. And if you consider who are the second lieutenants, 9 times out of 10, they're people that just graduated from college. They're like 21, 22 years old, really had to deal with before. And so there are training exercises to prepare them before they're like there. But even then, officers coming into these units, they have a mentor, right? And
mm,
they're normally partnered with a very experienced enlisted soldier that is there to guide them and essentially help them from making terrible mistakes in regards to planning and help coach and train them and develop them into their own thing, as well as like other higher level officers that are providing like professional development and stuff. But I think my experience as an enlisted soldier again shows parallels again of living the life and understanding what bad decision making, how that can impact you and your environment, your life, your family, your kids, better prepares you for when you're the one that has to make those decisions. Because then you're like, it isn't necessarily, it becomes how can we accomplish the mission while taking care of the soldier and their families without having to cause a burden on them. And it's not always the case. Sometimes the family is going to have to suffer a little bit. Sometimes the soldier is going to have to suffer a little bit because there's literally no other way. We just got to get it done. But I take this into my own leadership role whenever I'm planning out like new initiatives at the company or trying to problem solve things. Like I try to think of how this is going to impact these other business units. How is this going to impact the individual consultant? Is this going to add more time, more effort on their part? It's going to require more resources, more time, right? How is this going to affect their morale? Am I asking them to fill 60 hours of work in a 40-hour week, right? And like, how long am I asking them to do this for? Am I asking them to do it for a week? And then I need you guys to rally and suck it up. We got to get through it. Or am I asking you to do it for 6 months straight? Because that's just not feasible.
Mm.
And so I take those kind of decision making and that leadership into that I've learned in my various roles, both inside and outside of the Army, and use it in my day to day for my own minions, lack of a better word.
Yeah, no, thanks. Liam, I'm really happy about the way you've gone into your story and the detail you've gone in because, like, there will be people trying to break in or people going through tough times now, and you're managing consultant at NetSPI, and people will think, oh, do you know what? It's all right for him. But then when you unpack it like that, it's like you've had some really tough times. You actually just said it about 5 minutes ago. You were willing to take one step back to take two, three, or four forward. And I think it's really important for people to hear that. I think it's really important for people to hear about the tough times. I love that bit where you're talking as well about you sat there and went, right, hang on. I've lost my job here, or whatever's gone on, and you've gone, right. It's time to AppSec's getting big. My coding's weak. Bang, let's go. And you've
Mhm.
really taken on that attitude and mindset, and clearly, like, your levels of perseverance are there. And we can go into different technical things and Portsmouth or Web Academy, mate. Yeah, to think that resource is free is just crazy because it's that good. But I want to talk a little bit about you've shown huge levels of resilience there. You've hit some really tough times. You've looked within. You've done the complete opposite to playing the victim. You've blamed it on yourself and gone, how can I get better? How can more people do that? Because I think if you've got that resilience, that get up and go, that perseverance, I think if you've got that, I think success a lot of the times going to eventually come. You mentioned about being in the right place at the right time. You definitely made your own look, by the way, on that when you said you got it by default. But there was so much you'd done before to get to that position. It was just completely and utterly deserved, mate. But yeah, basically, mate, the question I'm asking is, how can people get that level of resilience and perseverance that you've clearly got, mate?
Yeah. So I would say there's no perseverance, there's no oomph in trying to get stuff done, then I'm about to run out of money. And by run out of money, meaning I'm about to not have a place to live. And you can't tell from the audio, but I like to eat and food costs money. And I'll be honest, that was a huge driver for me. I had never felt failure like that in my life ever. I had always been somewhat successful in everything I had tried to do. I didn't always achieve everything that I wanted to achieve, but I had been somewhat successful. And being let go, in whether in this case I was fired, but being laid off or fired, right? That feeling is terrible because I went through several stages. I was angry and I was just like, this is expletive ridden. And then I went to being sad, and then I went into shock and then being scared because I was like, oh no, how are we going to pay our bills? And then also during this time, my wife and I decided we were going to try and have a kid while I was unemployed. And that was another layer of stress. And then honestly, it came to a point, I think after about month almost in a month 1.5, I went to her and I was like, all right, you're the banker, you control the bank accounts and everything. At what point am I going to go start delivering pizzas again, or we're taking whatever jobs we can while we're trying to get us through? And I was like, because I am not too proud to go knock on the door at Papa John's or Pizza Hut and start asking for delivery driver jobs. And she was like, we're not there yet. I'll let you know when we get there, but we've got enough to hang us over. And so the perseverance aspect, right? The purpose, the drive, the motivation, right? It's those things are super hard to teach, right? Because you either want it or you don't want it. And I tell my team, I don't know, I grew up in the South. There were plenty of times that my mother would put food on my plate that I didn't want to eat. And then she was like, I'd be like, I don't want this, I want that. And she goes, I guess you're not hungry enough, because if you were hungry enough, you would eat it. And so that's stuck with me over time. And I translated that. I stole this from Eric Thomas, which is he's
Like it.
known as the hip hop preacher, but
Yeah.
he essentially was saying, if you just want it, you don't really want it, you just want it. And it's, if you're not willing to put in the time and the effort and the energy to learn the things that you need to learn and do the things that you need to do in order to be there, to get to where you're trying to go, then you just want it. And I found that's true in doing all the interviews that I've conducted as the hiring manager, and coming back and giving people feedback. And even as a mentor as well, people come to me and they're like, I want to get into this industry. I want to make six figures. I want all this training. I want all this cool stuff. And that's great that you want all those things. However, you can't even tell me in your own words what a pen test is, right? And I'm not knocking your goals or what you want for yourself by any means, but I'm highlighting that if you want to do this stuff, you have to read, you have to talk to other people, you have to study, you have to hone your craft every single day. And that means you got to make sacrifices. Sometimes when the rest of your friends are going out Friday night, you're staying in, cracking open the book after work or whatever. And so, not saying that you need to eat, sleep, live, and breathe this stuff, because as studies have shown, that's not good for your mental health either. You have to have a balance, but you should be honing your craft every single day and getting that continuous progress. The amount of honing that you're doing is directly correlated to how fast you're going to achieve whatever your end goal is. So if you're like, I'm going to study an hour a week, that's fine and that's great. However, if you study 5 hours a week, you're probably going to achieve your goal a lot faster.
Mm.
So those are, for me, the driving things where I like having a roof and I like to eat and I need money for those things. So I'm going to dedicate everything I got to getting to where I want to go to better position myself for my own future success. And then at this point now, my family success, because it's not just
Mm.
me anymore. And there were a lot of nights, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, cracking, studying for an interview that I'm conducting, and 6 or 7 hours later, a lot of grinding to get to where I'm at, and then viewing each setback as part of the
Mm.
journey to me getting to, Z, is I had to go through a
Mm.
hundred interviews in order to land at the final spot, right? And so taking that approach of, I'm viewing every single step as a milestone, right? It's like, what, and then I do an after action review after every time, right? Lessons learned, like what went right in the interview, what went wrong, and then what can I do better to prevent what happened this time from happening again, right? And I would just take notes while I'm on the interview, right? Nice little notepad, doesn't need to be fancy, keeping it analog in the digital world, but writing down
Mm.
like, man, I keep blanking on this type of question that they ask. And I know this material, I just don't understand why I keep blanking on it. And then I think by pulling on that thread, you're going to find that it's not necessarily the skill you've been targeting that you're weak at, it's other skills that you didn't know that you were weak at, right? Some people have difficulty public speaking. Some people are very smart technically. And I've interviewed these people where I know they know the answer, but I'm asking this exact same question in a different way to see if you truly know the answer. And they just stumble all over themselves because their nerves get the best of them, or those sorts of things, right? And then there's lots of strategies that you can do in that, right? And so I take this into my work as well. of sometimes I'm working on a Linux machine. Other times I'm working on a Windows machine. Other times I'm working on a machine that's super locked down and all I got is Python. And so I try to figure out what are multiple ways that I can accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish. What are the different ways that I can do it? So here's a bash script that can do it. Here's a PowerShell script that can do it. Here's a Python script that can do it. And taking that approach to the technical side of things, I also try to translate that to the soft skills side of things. So what are the different ways that I can try to accomplish whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish, right? And this kind of translates into the leadership side of things because everybody's different. And I have some people on my team that I can just say, I need you to do X by Y, and they will do it exactly when I need them. I have other people where I have to hold their hand a little bit. I have to coach them through some of these things. I have other people that respond very well to me being blunt and direct with them and saying, your performance is not good. And these are the areas you need to fix. And then here's how we're going to do it. Are you good with it? Yes. Okay, let's do it. And then there's other people where I can't be as blunt. I have to be like, you've done really good this time, but there's some areas that we need to work on. And then here are the areas, right? And so accomplishing the same thing, getting the employee to perform at the highest optimal level, but my approach to doing it has to differ, has to change. And I can only do that when I understand the environment. And the same thing applies to everything else we were talking about before. You have to understand, you have to know where you are, you have to understand the environment, and you have to know where you want to go.
Leo, mate, thank you. And mate, it's like this continuous appetite that you've had for self improvement, and I think the compound effect of it's really paid off. I really like the bit you said about um, you viewed it as part of the journey. So when something goes, I do it. Like I say, you do that. You go, God, I've wasted so much time here. No, you haven't, because if you could just go straight to the vulnerability in the piece of code first time,
Yeah.
then it wouldn't be anything to be good at code review. If you could just spot every vulnerability in every app straight away, then there'd be no such thing as pen testers, because we'd all just do it. So it's like it
Yeah.
is. I think seeing career progression, seeing success in any walk of life, seeing it is all part of the journey. I think that's a great way of looking at things, and I think it will be great for your mindset. Also, as well, mate, like just listening to you, how busy life is. Like you say, you've talked about like juggling finances there. You've been really, really open about that. And you've talked about, and I'm sure things are good for you now, mate, where you are. But obviously there's been some tough times along the way. But when you talk about that journey and life and busy and things like that, and you've obviously really pushed people to get the feedback and stuff like that. And I think that's really, really good, mate. So, mate, your journey, mate, you deserve to be where you are, Brody. You've like, you've properly grinded, mate. I want to talk a bit about. We've touched on leadership a few times, so I want to talk about that. I definitely just want to ask you a few more things on the interviews. But when you were talking about life in general there and how busy, I can imagine like the little one running around, and you got one eye on the little one eye on the bank account, one eye on this, one eye on that. You're high, then later down the line you're doing it. All of a sudden, it's there's so much going on, and the point I'm making is you've obviously had people have to be nudged, and you have to be persistent, and you have to, rightly or wrongly so, you've had to really push and get that feedback to allow you to learn. I'll give you a great example. Last week, few interviews I had. One chap didn't get through. I was meant to call him on Friday. I didn't. The week just ran away with me, and he actually pinged me on WhatsApp yesterday. It was a Sunday, and I picked up the phone to him, and he pushed me, and I should have given him the feedback last week. The week just, but the point I'm making here is that life's busy. If you want to move forward or you want answers, sometimes you've just got to push that bit
Mhm.
harder, especially in today's world. Like we've all got stuff pinging off everywhere and stuff like that. But yeah, mate, there's just so much stuff in here, mate, for the listeners to pick up on. I want to ask you about these interviews, mate. Like it sounds like you could be an interview pro. The kind of question that kind of flings into my mind is, what do you know now about interviewing that you didn't used to know? Or it'd be nice to know like your top two or three biggest learnings that you had or you took from all those interviews. So for anyone out there that's planning on interviewing for a job soon or is interviewing for jobs right now, what do you know now, mate, that you didn't know before those 100 and whatever interviews?
Yeah, for sure. I know there's so many lessons learned here. I would say the first thing is that you have to know quasi your who your interviewer is. And so one of the things that I try to do is I try to figure out who is actually going to interview me. And then I research them. I want to know who I'm talking to. They're going to know who they're talking to because they have my resume in front of them. And I feel that as the interviewee, too should have a right to know who's interviewing me. Not so I can be like, this person isn't qualified to interview me, because even if I think that, it doesn't matter because they're going to interview me anyways. But I like to know their background and their history and things. And I don't know, the my psyop experience comes in, picking up things from an interrogation battalion comes in, but I try to bring that into the conversation, right? If I know that they graduated from Michigan, I may bring that up in the conversation. And I try to find ways to make myself more memorable, because there was a point that Invisium was aggressively hiring, and I was on 10, 15 interviews a week, just trying to hire people for the work that we needed. And eventually, those names start to be a blur, the people start to be a blur, and it's not, it's just the way it is. I'm literally on interviews for 6 hours a day, every day straight. And so that's the first thing. Figure out who's trying to interview you and ask. Always ask the question, right? The worst they're going to do is either tell, I'm not going to tell you, or two, they're just not going to answer. And in the Pate family, like in the Pate household, closed mouths don't get fed. So if you want to know something or you want something, you got to ask for it. And that's how I run my team as well. And so you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions, right? The worst I'm going to do is tell you no, or I don't know, or I'm just not going to answer you. And very rarely does the final one happen. I normally try to follow up with people as soon as I can. But so there's that piece. Number two, things don't move as fast as you want, right? Because while I interviewed you and you're like, this person just interviewed me, why haven't I heard back from them? It's been 24 hours. I also had a team of 12 people that I was responsible for. And I also have to continue to ensure success at my business. And the organization not necessarily falls apart when I'm not there, but I still have other responsibilities that I have to do outside of my responsibilities as a hiring manager. I normally try to give 48 hours minimum before I start knocking on people's doors trying to figure out what's going on. And so there's that aspect of it. And then I want to say, like, the final one, and I think the biggest one, is I've experienced from both an interviewer and an interviewee, is a strategy for hiring and applying. And the strategy I look at is performance and potential. And that's how I split up the applicant in front of me. And I try to say, okay, here's the position I'm hiring for. These are the job requirements and the responsibilities of the position that I created, right? And therefore, when I'm looking at an applicant, I'm using that job description as the yardstick to measure them by. And I say, okay, I obviously I don't go bullet point to bullet point because I would be doing this all day, every day. But I try to say, is there enough here from a performance standpoint that I can point to say with a decent confidence level that this person is going to be successful in this job? And if the answer is no, then I say, okay, is there enough on the resume to demonstrate how well they could possibly do in this job? Are there core skills that directly correlate over? So for instance, if someone is applying for a pen testing position at a consulting firm, and I see uh, they worked at a bank, and then they were a mechanic for a couple years, and then they went to a community college or a 4-year degree and got a computer science degree or something. And then they've been doing some IT network administration or something. And now they want an entry level position or a junior position or a position as a pen tester. On the performance side of things, I'm like, there's nothing really here that directly correlates to being a consultant, and not just a consultant, but also an offensive security professional. So now I need to take a look at their potential. And I'm like, oh, this person in the last 2 years has gotten 5 certifications in regards to pen testing. They've gotten maybe an OSCP, maybe they got a CEH and a Security Plus. And so I was like, okay, they took their time to get this, whether it's part of their degree program or not. They went out, they studied, they challenged the cert, and then they got it. So there's that. And then I also see that they're also involved in Hack the Box, right? And they've got a link to their Hack the Box there. And it's okay. I also see, if I go and look at their LinkedIn page, which is also listed on their resume, I also see that they're commenting on things. So I'm looking at their writing style and writing ability. Are you able to take Are you writing like walls of text versus coherent messages and that sort of thing? And I'm like, okay, so based on all this information I have within the last 20 minutes I've been looking at this resume, I feel like this person, there's enough there to get to the first stage of the interviews. That's also another strategy that I employ when I was a hiring manager, is not looking at a resume and be like, yes, this person, we can hire this person today, because I don't have a confidence level on it. So I look at it from a perspective of, is there enough here that I currently have at my disposal to warrant moving them to the next stage? And then providing a more focused plan for our hiring. So the first part was screening the resume. And then the second part was a 15-minute phone call with the operations manager, where I gave her a cut sheet, and I was like, ask these 3 questions, write down their answers, and then give it back to me, and then I'll tell you if we're going to move forward or not. That was like our screening call. And then the second call was personality, and then the third call was the technical assessment, which was just a conversation, hour and a half, 2 hours, and then at the end we made a decision. And that's how I approached it. Is there enough here to warrant moving forward in the next stage? And so what I tell people is, if you don't have experience, direct experience doing exactly what the job is looking for, then you have to make up for it in potential. And the way that you do that is by doing the extracurricular things,
Mm.
the getting the certifications, which isn't always the case because certifications are expensive, right? But you can demonstrate potential by going to your local B-sides, or being involved in your ISA meetings, chapter meetings, going to meetups, running your own blog posts, having your own GitHub, demonstrating your own competence in the areas that you're trying to do. Like, for me, I try to flesh all of that out, but I think I'm also built different, because not every hiring manager is like this, because they probably have a lot of interviews or a lot of resumes they got to dig through. So they're probably using some sort of automation, I would imagine. But I try to make myself stand out. What will make me look better than everybody else that's applying? And I try to just knock it down one at a time. Am I active in security organizations? Like, check. Yes, I am. I'm active. I'm showing up. I'm contributing. And then, is there a way that I can publicly show that I'm contributing? Because it's great that I know, and it's great the organizers know, but I also need the world to be able to figure this out as well. And then writing a blog post, having our own personal website. And even then, that's a cool project, figuring out, how do I host a website and build it from scratch? If I'm applying for a pen testing job, then it'd be great if you had some tools that you developed. And it doesn't need to be like some fancy like Cobalt Strike deal, but like, here are some scripts that when I'm doing this sort of work that I've built, these are the things that I'm like trying to look for and target. Because then from reading your programs and your scripts, I can figure out, one, your maturity level at coding, but then two, I can also see your decision making process as well, right? How are you structuring this stuff? And then two, also specific to my industry, consulting, you got to be able to write as well. You got to be able to
Mm.
speak, and you got to be able to write. And so, are you, when you're writing in your code, are you putting in comments, or is it just like rough scratches? When you're, and I would also say that every aspect of the interview process, you're being graded, whether you realize it or not. So from the resume submission to the back and forth emails, to the phone calls, to the Zoom, the video interviews, like, you're being graded, right, in every step. And so if you're just sending sentences without proper grammar and punctuation and things, then it could be misconstrued as, oh, this person's lazy and they want something for nothing. And what the other person doesn't know is that you've got 2 3-year-olds screaming in the back seat, and you're trying to get this out real quick. So this kind of leads to perception is reality, and how I perceive something coming across from me. There's one of you as the interviewer, as the interviewee trying to be interviewed, but I've got a pool of 200 people I can pick from. And you got to make every interaction matter. And that's something else as well.
Mm, mm. Yeah, Leo, thanks, mate. I really like the bit about basically having a checklist and just knocking them off one at a time. And for anyone
Mm,
listening, there you mentioned developing tools and showing that off online. You mentioned GitHub. You mentioned personal website. You mentioned certifications, hack the box. You mentioned activity on LinkedIn. There's so many things there. You could almost, by listening, stop and starting this pod now, you could almost create a pretty decent checklist above and beyond the traditional stuff that you'll be doing anyway. So for people listening, I think there's a good checklist that you can create there just off what you've just said there, Leo. Mate, this has been a long one, by the way, but it's good. I'm just looking at the time now and I'm thinking nearly an hour. Then I'm like, oh no, we had that technical issue. So
I'm
this is like,
long-winded.
yeah, no,
Long-winded.
mate,
I
no,
know
mate.
I
Listen,
am.
it's good, mate. It's been long because it's been a good, really good value-adding episode, mate. I'm just going to ask you two more questions, mate, and then we'll wrap up, mate. But listen, mate, so far, this has been really good, mate. On leadership, you've mentioned a few things there. Maybe just a few points for folks that are progressing up the ranks, want to progress up the ranks, do's and don'ts for leadership stuff now that you wish you knew 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, you need a team. You have to have a team, right? And the higher you move up, it was told to me early in my career, the higher you move up, the smaller the spotlight gets on you. And you've got to be able to perform at those levels. And so at the end of the day, though, it comes back to the people that you're leading, right? And so if I have some initiative that I'm trying to accomplish that falls under my charge in my company, 9 times out of 10, I can't do it by myself. I have to have people rallying around me and leading them effectively to get the job done, because literally the job may be way too big for me to handle myself. And so I think a big part of I think a big challenge for people when they move from an individual contributor role in a security space to now becoming the manager is that they don't want to let go of the technical skills. They want to continue be on the keyboard. My boss said it last week. He said he had a CEO at one point in his career that they were in meetings, and these eventually people are going to have to let go of the rock. And the scenario he said was, if you're trying to cross this raging river and you need both hands to hold on so you can cross the river, there's always going to be someone that just wants to hold on to the rock and they don't want to let go of the rock. He goes, and in order for you to accomplish good things, you have to let go of the rock and adapt to the scenario so you can continue moving forward. And so I've seen a lot of technical leaders, like, they can't, you can't pull them off of the keyboard, and they just want to continue to operate at the level of an individual contributor, where that is a big, you can't do that, right? Because somebody has to be leading the charge on it, and the only way you're going to be doing that is if you're literally higher than everybody else, so you can see the landscape and move your people as you see fit. And I think that's a giant challenge that I feel like a lot of leaders have. And so when I get junior leaders under me that are new to these positions, I make them aware of this, and I have this conversation up front: is, you want to get into leadership, like, how do you feel about giving up this technical aspect of your job? And they're like, what do you mean give it up? And be like, meaning you're not doing it anymore, you have to turn it over to someone else. And then they're like, I don't want to do that. And then I'm like, okay, then you're not ready to move into leadership and management yet, because it's a different way of thinking. So that's one of the big ones for me. And then I think from there, you've got to take care of your people. And it's not just, are we accomplishing whatever it is in our job that we're trying to accomplish? But I think I've had great success with viewing people as people. And I know that's easier said than done, but like, I take an interest in my people's lives, right? If you report to me or report up to me in some way, shape, or form, then I take an interest in your life. I think New York had a big earthquake last week. And so NetSPI is a global company. We have people everywhere. And so I went to my team first and I said, who lives in New York City, and are you okay? And then if you're not okay, then we need to have a conversation to figure out how me and the company can best support what you need right now. And so that's outside of work. And that asking that question took 5 seconds to type out. But when people read that, they're like, oh man, my boss really cares about me and my well being, which is true. I do. And so from there, I was able to, not just from there, but just from acts like that, I'm able to really get and establish a relationship with everybody that reports to me, right? I don't get to talk to them all the time, but it's building a relationship and building trust with these people, right? To know that in the good times, promotions, pay raises, if you do good work, you will be rewarded and I will advocate on your behalf. Also, the bad times too, I will hold you accountable. I will tell you where you're failing to meet the mark. I believe in transparency and being honest with people. I feel like sometimes newer leaders coming in, they avoid conflict and therefore they don't want to have hard conversations with people when they're not meeting the standard. And instead of solving the root cause of telling that person you're not meeting the standard and I'm going to help you craft a plan to get you to meeting the standard, they would rather move work around and assign it to other people and just that sort of thing just to insulate this person.
Mm.
But then that creates a burden on everybody else because now they're like, I have to do my job and this at the same time, but Jimmy over here isn't doing anything. Like, how is this fair? And it causes discourse amongst the team. And so I've tried really hard to establish standards across the board, not just for my own positions, but also standards for my subordinate leaders and then standards for myself and then communicate that and foster this environment of if you're not if anybody's not meeting the standard, like professionally, you can go to them and tell them, I think you're failing, or I think you're not doing what you need to be doing, right? And have a professional conversation about it. It's not everybody in my team is a leader to an extent. Just because you don't have a position and a title does not necessarily mean that you're not an influence at the organization or for the team, right? And so I think establishing those standards early and communicating that to the team is one thing. And then the second thing is demonstrating that there is one standard and people will be held accountable, but also creating an environment where people can own their jobs. And the only way that you're going to be able to own their jobs and truly own it and delegate that authority to them to execute is you have to have that relationship with them because a lot of leaders may be hesitant give to delegate that authority if they don't have a high confidence level that they're going to do a good enough job. And that was something that I struggled with early on is this is the way that I would do it and I know it would be done right because I know it would be done right. But I don't have time to do it because I got to do this other stuff. So I got to pass it off to someone else. And then that's where micromanaging comes into play. And so I've had to mitigate that and come to the understanding, the realization that this person is different. They have different expertise and responsibilities and viewpoints and perspectives. And and so I'm going to give them a task and I'm going to give them what the desired outcome is and what my deliverables are and what I expect from it, and then let them go, right? Just let them go and then be available, give them a deadline, and then be available to answer any questions. And then come to the realization that whatever they give me is not going to be 100% of what I wanted. But as long as it's 80% of what I expect, then I can tweak it to get to that other 20%, right? And but that only works is if I'm communicating effectively and telling them not necessarily how to do their job, but what I expect of this finished product or at the end result, right? And so crafting a vision, letting them come up with a strategy of how they're going to do it. And then in turn, you're also, they may not realize it or not, but you're coaching them through decision making, right? That problem solving. And so it's I can't just like I can't teach purpose, I can't teach motivation, and I can't teach direction. I also can't teach you how to think, right? But I can give you things to work through to flex that muscle while providing those coaching opportunities of did you consider this and this? And then if you didn't, then you should, because that's going to impact this big thing over here. So you're close, but you're not there yet. Go back and rework it. And that works unless you have a very short suspense. Like I need this tomorrow and I need this by end of day and it's 12 o'clock. I don't have time to coach you on it. I just need you to get it done. And so there's a trade off. But in regards to leadership, communication, ownership, adaptability, accountability, and then fostering an environment where it's okay for people to say, I don't know. And it's okay for people to ask questions without fear of like ridicule or anything of that nature, I think is just critical to building out really great teams that can accomplish really anything.
Mate, thank you, buddy. Yeah, I think the articulating the vision and being able to communicate clearly and standards as well, mate. I think that's just an absolutely huge one. And thank you for that. Last question, my friend. We're almost there, mate. It's been a good episode, Leo. The book or podcast that's had the most positive impact on your security career, leadership journey, any part of your
Hmm.
career so far, mate?
Yeah, I'll do one you didn't say, conferences. I think
Okay,
B-sides
cool.
conferences are great. I've spoken at numerous B-side conferences in the Southeast region. You interact with your local security community there. And then, especially when you're speaking on a topic, I would encourage people that you have something of value to contribute, right? It doesn't always need to be this earth shattering 0 day vulnerability that you wrote a POC for that you found, or you've got this hot new tool that's out there, right? I literally, the last talk I did was a couple years ago, but it was literally my career. And I think I labeled it was Star Wars themed, but I can't remember exactly what the title was, but the subtitle was My Rocky Path to the Dark Side. And it was from defensive security to how I transitioned that from IT to defensive to offensive security, and how they all kind of correlate and helped each other. And just sharing that information. And then the second thing, from the leadership side of things, there's a book called The Phoenix Project. It reads like fiction, but if you've ever been in the shoes of the main character in the Phoenix Project, it's like you're like, this book was written for me. Someone, I feel seen, is how I felt. And then there's a lot of good information in there that reads like a story, right? Because without spoiling it, it's about this person that was a pretty good mid-level manager, ran their team, was super sharp, everything was good across the board. Then someone got fired, and this guy got plucked and thrown into that position, and now he has to challenge he has all these new challenges that he has to deal with and face, and that he's never really had to experience before. And it walks through all these various leadership and management challenges, person conflicts with people, having to work with different business units, having to balance the security with the business side of things, working with a board, working directly with a CEO, speaking truth to power. There's just a lot of good facts and information in there that anybody that's wanting to move into a technical leadership role most definitely should be on their reading list to take a look at.
Cool, mate. Cool. The Phoenix Project, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Got it, mate. Thank you, my friend. There's been everything in this episode, mate. We've had kind of stuff on communication. We've had stuff on interviews. We've had stuff on coming back from tough times. We've had stuff about transitioning out the army into the commercial world, then how to progress in the commercial world, what to do when you have setbacks, different thing about learning resources. Look, just so much stuff on mindset, resilience, mate. It's been good, mate. Do you think we've about nailed it?
Awesome. Yeah, and there
Yeah.
was a lot more. There's a lot more
Yeah.
that I didn't even touch on that I like
Yeah.
had written down. So it's
Okay.
great. It's all good.
No, it's been good, man. But Leo, my friend, thank you. Genuinely, mate, really enjoyed that. There was actually so many things as you were speaking that really resonated with different things I've been through, and I think that we can relate this to lots of different careers, not even just security. There's so much kind of
Mm-hmm.
life skills and life lessons there. Thank you, and I'll see you soon, bro.
Absolutely.